To discuss the legal ramifications of this court challenge, we're joined by Pearl Eliadis. She is a human rights lawyer and associate professional at the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill, and she's kind enough to join us from Montreal tonight. Professor, how significant is it that the Supreme Court is hearing this challenge?
Well, it's not unexpected given the nature of the issues at stake, but by the very fact that the court has agreed to hear this, they are signaling that this is a significant case for the Canadian public, and we should understand it as such.
Now, the federal government has said it would intervene in the case and make arguments against Bill 21 in front of the court. What message does this send to the rest of the country and Canadians?
Well, I think it's important to take this in its much longer sort of history, which is that since 1867, federal governments, provincial governments, and territorial governments have had very different interpretations of what the Constitution means. So this kind of dispute about what the Constitution means is part of our discourse, part of our conversations we have among legislatures and courts, and they've been going on for a long time. And it's very important in this case in particular, I think, that the court intervenes to deal with the large number of issues that have been raised by the many parties that are now before it.
Now, the law has been challenged first in the Quebec Superior Court and then in the Quebec Court of Appeal without success. Do you think things will be any different this time around?
I can't possibly decide the only or even have a view on it. When the court issues its decision to grant leave to appeal, it never gives reasons, and there were literally, you know, more than a dozen arguments raised by the many parties in this case, ranging from the notwithstanding clause to the role of gender equality to election rights. We don't know what aspect the court is going to weigh in on. What we do know is that the court is prepared to embark on this conversation about at least some of the issues that are now preoccupying so many Canadians.
You mentioned the notwithstanding clause, Section 33 of the Charter also. It affects people across the Canada, not just in Quebec, of course. So how do you think the hearing will impact other governments maybe when they see this and the challenge to the notwithstanding clause? Because we know Ontario has used it, Quebec has used it.
Right. Right. So, you know, both Quebec and Ontario, you know, both conservative governments have been testing the waters by kind of pushing the line, using the notwithstanding clause more than I think many lawyers had originally understood it to be used. But it's important to remember that the issue here is not only about the notwithstanding clause, it's also about the relationship between that clause and, for example, other parts of the Charter that are not subject to the notwithstanding clause, and how can you use those rights or interpretive rights, if you will, in the absence of the rights that have been carved out because of the notwithstanding clause. There are really interesting conversations that are going on about so-called unwritten principles of constitutional law, like the rule of law. Where's the rule of law now in these kinds of cases? What about protecting minorities? What about the interpretive provision in the Charter that supports multiculturalism, the equality of women? We've not really had the Supreme Court weigh in on all of these issues in one case.
And
that, of course, affects the whole country. Sorry.
Well, I was going to add that this is affecting the whole country, and that's why we're paying such close attention to it. Anything you want to add before I let you go? That we're not touching on here?
I did hear that clip. I did hear that clip earlier from Minister Barrett. And I think it's important to remember that secularism is part of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. There's no question that secularism is part of our Charter. The issue is how the Quebec government is using it as a way to reduce religious freedom. That's the question. His characterization of the issue, in my respectful view, is not correct.
We appreciate that. Thank you for catching that. Professor Pearl Eliadis is a human rights lawyer, and she was kind enough to join us from Montreal. We'll probably talk about this again as it makes its way up to the court. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.